So in case you missed the live session, I've recorded a separate presentation just to make sure that nobody missed out. So to give you a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to start out with a quick bio about myself and what I do for modern athletes specifically. And then we're going to talk about personal nutrition development, nutrition's role in performance, the hierarchy of performance nutrition, differences in populations, so athletic populations versus the general population. We'll do a little myth busting, and then we'll talk about understanding your specific fueling needs, and I'm going to give you an easy place to start. So a big takeaway. All right, so in case you don't know me, my name is Erik Roman. I served in the Marine Corps as an 0311 in infantryman. I served with 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Division, and then following the military, I pursued my education in nutrition and dietetics. So I got my Bachelor's of Science in that. Then I went on to pass my national registration exam and officially became a registered dietitian. Started out working in a hospital, and while I was working in the hospital, I completed my master's degree also in nutrition and dietetics. On a personal note, I've got a bunch of hobbies. They're all very active. So I just recently, in the past couple of years, got into ultra endurance running, which has been an adventure, to say the least. Other than that, I'm a big bow hunter. I live in Wisconsin, so lots of deer hunting, big part of life around here. I snowboard pretty frequently. I surf when I can find waves. And I have tried my hand at jiu-jitsu, but since getting into ultra running, that has definitely cut into my rolling time. So once I accomplish my mission of hopefully completing a 100-mile foot race, I will probably get out of the ultra endurance game for a little bit and get back to jiu-jitsu. But total novice, still enjoy doing it. Either way, as you can see, I've got a bunch of different hobbies, so nutrition plays a huge role in my life just to sustain my ability to participate and continue to, participate at a full level in all of these hobbies that I enjoy. So what I do for Modern Athlete, I'll give you a brief mission statement from myself as a dietitian. My mission is to equip the everyday grunt with the knowledge, tools, and skills necessary to adequately fuel the body with nutrient-dense foods in a sustainable manner across various sports and job capacities, such as tactical athletes, to maximize performance and health span. So with Modern Athlete, I primarily do one-to-one coaching. I also am going to be introducing group coaching, so stay tuned. Keep your eyes out for that. That'll be an exciting offer. I really like the group setting because participants in the group can, bounce ideas off one another, especially with like meal prepping and meal suggestions, and then I can kind of come in and guide the discussion. And that will also be done in the format like my one-to-one coaching, where I run everybody through kind of a basic nutrition course just to make sure that the foundation is strong. Outside of coaching, I've also developed some nutrition guides for Modern Athletes. So you may have already seen the complete nutrition guide. We'll also be dropping an endurance-specific nutrition guide, a strength and power specific nutrition guide, and then last but not least, a meal planning and meal prep guide. So keep your eyes out for that. Very excited about that. All right, without further ado, let's jump right in. So personal nutrition development. This I want you to think of as just a continuous cycle. So it's never ending. You're always in flux in this cycle. So the first part of the cycle starts with your knowledge base. Having a firm understanding of human metabolism, your individualized nutrition needs, macronutrients, micronutrients, the timing of nutrients, your hydration, using supplements safely and effectively, and then of course just having a basic or possibly advanced understanding of cooking and how to select proper foods. From that knowledge base, you always move into implementation. So you take that knowledge and you actually put it to work. So what does that look like? So if you understand your individualized needs, how many calories do you need? Well, you put that into practice. All right, I'm going to run on, let's say, 2,500 calories for a couple weeks and see how that goes. You work on your macronutrient distributions. Am I getting enough protein? Am I getting enough carbohydrate to properly recover from training? From there, you look at your micronutrient needs. You do an in-depth assessment of your food intake just to see if you're hitting all your micronutrients. And if you're not, then maybe you start doing some strategic supplementation. You check your hydration status daily to make sure you're staying on top of your hydration. And then from there, after implementation, you do an assessment. And again, it's not like you're in one step, the knowledge base, and then implementation and assessment. You're kind of doing all three of these things continuously. But in the assessment phase, you're starting to assess how everything's going. So some objective assessment measures would be things like your body weight. That's a really easy one to keep track of, especially over the span of a couple weeks, like 2 to 4 weeks. Is my weight maintaining? Am I going up? Am I going down? And you can start trending. A better metric would be lean body mass, but that is going to require more in-depth testing. Maybe something like a DEXA scan, which will give you your lean mass, your body fat percentage, your bone density. Some performance markers of assessment would be things like if you're in strength and power, maybe looking at things like 1 rep max, right? Am I actually getting stronger? From an endurance standpoint, it could be things like what are my split times, or how am I feeling on a really long run? Was I able to make it the 15 miles, the 20 miles, the marathon distance, the 50K distance, things like that. After you assess, you go back to knowledge base, right? Because maybe something wasn't where you wanted it to be. Well, maybe my macronutrient distributions were incorrect. Maybe I need to improve my knowledge in that realm. And then you go back to implementation and then reassess. And again, you're continuously moving through this development cycle. All right, moving on. So what is nutrition's role in performance? So the goal of performance and athletics, I think that most people would agree upon, is that we're trying to get better continuously. We're trying to get faster. We're trying to run further. We're trying to get stronger, bigger, build muscle. Well, there's three main components to achieving that mission. The first one is a training stimulus. You need to introduce stimulus to grow. So whether that be resistance training or running or some other form of training, you need that stimulus to actually get your body into gear, break muscle tissue down to be rebuilt, right? Exhaust some glycogen stores so that it can be refueled and allow your body to adapt to this stimulus. From there, after the training stimulus is introduced, obviously you need building blocks to refuel, to repair, to rehydrate, and to reduce any inflammation or other damage caused by that training stimulus. So again, similar to the personal nutrition development cycle, this is what I consider the work recovery cycle. You do physical work, and then you introduce nutrition and time. That's the third part that I did not mention. The third important piece of the puzzle is time. Training stimulus plus the nutrition is great, but if you don't give your body time to actually replenish, repair, rehydrate, and reduce that inflammation, it's not going to work. We all want to go really hard in the gym and on those runs, but if you don't give yourself time off to let your body do what it needs to do to repair and rebuild, you're going to fall flat on your face eventually or end up with an injury, which I'm sure everyone has experienced at one point or another. So going back to that work recovery cycle, we go through training stimulus and then we work on recovery. And that's where you take those building blocks, which is your nutrition, paired with that time off. And that is going to allow your body to do what it needs to do to prime you for your next training status. The athlete that recovers the best is always going to perform the best. So if athlete A recovers fully, let's just say 100%, versus athlete B, who wasn't on their recovery game and they're only recovered 80%, well, guess what? Athlete A is going to crush athlete B because they're entering the next training session fully primed. So that recovery is huge. You're only as good as your recovery game. And that's where that nutrition and that time off really comes into play. So let's dive a little deeper into that. This is the performance nutrition hierarchy. So when it comes to performance nutrition, some things are obviously a little bit more important than other. So let's start with the base of this pyramid, okay? The most important things to remember as an athlete is first your total energy intake. As an athlete, you are burning more energy than a sedentary individual. Not only are you burning more energy just through your physical work, right? That training stimulus, be it resistance training or maybe running or something similar. But in addition to that, you likely have more lean body mass, which is metabolically active tissue, meaning that even at rest, your body is burning more calories just to keep those muscles functioning. So for example, somebody that has more bicep muscle, every time they move their arm, okay, they are going to be burning calories. That muscle contraction doesn't happen out of thin air. Every movement we have throughout the day requires energy. So the more muscle tissue you have, the more calories it takes just to sustain you at a baseline compared to somebody with less lean mass. So outside of total energy intake is proper distribution of your macronutrients. As an athlete, it's ever more important to make sure that you are consuming enough protein, consuming enough carbohydrates, opposed to a sedentary individual that can get away with going through bigger fluctuations and maybe not hitting their protein goal, hitting it, exceeding it, not hitting it. As an athlete, it becomes more important to stay on top of those macronutrient distributions. And then finally, to round off the base, is adequate hydration. Dehydration is performance's worst nightmare. If you go into training dehydrated, it will absolutely prevent you from performing your best. So just making sure you continuously drink water throughout the day. And you gauge your hydration status, which you can easily do just by looking at your urine color, which we want to be very close to clear, maybe a light hint straw-colored urine. But the darker yellow that urine is, the more likely you are to be in a mild to severe state of dehydration, which we absolutely want to avoid at all costs. That also includes replacing and replenishing your electrolytes, especially if you're a heavy sweater. Now, moving up the hierarchy to the middle, we've got your micronutrient needs and your fiber needs. So with your micronutrients, they are very important pieces of the puzzle for numerous reasons. However, in comparison to the base of that pyramid, you can go a couple of days with not hitting your micronutrient needs specifically, and it will most likely go unnoticed. But over a prolonged period of time, if you become deficient in any one micronutrient, it will most certainly inhibit your performance, especially the key nutrients like iron, magnesium, zinc, B vitamins. Those micronutrients are incredibly important in performance. So if you slack for weeks on end and you don't meet your micronutrient goals, it will definitely cascade into negative performance. From there, I talk about fiber. Fiber is something that, especially in Western culture and America specifically, we do not eat enough of, okay? And for athletes, it's tough because fibrous foods are extremely healthy, but it's hard to eat them around the training window, especially when our energy needs are so high, because high fiber foods are really low in calories, right? Fiber itself has no caloric value associated with it. It's technically indigestible. But fibers serve as the food, the prebiotic, to the beneficial bacteria residing in our GI tract. Those are the probiotic bacteria. And new research keeps coming out indicating the really important role these bacteria can potentially play in performance. So although humans cannot technically digest fibers from plant foods, the good probiotic bacteria in our GI tract can. And the byproducts of them metabolizing these prebiotic fibers are short-chain fatty acids. So they produce these short-chain fatty acids after they digest those fibers, and then we can actually absorb and utilize those short-chain fatty acids. And scientists are working hard to identify which strains of probiotics top-tier athletes have more of, which prebiotic fibers are best to feed those bacteria. The point being, make sure you hit your fiber goal. The easiest way to remember that, 14 grams of fiber for 2,000 calories. So on a 2,000 calorie diet, at the very least, you should be consuming 28 grams of fiber a day. So definitely don't leave that out. The other part of the equation with fiber is that when you eat high fiber foods, those are typically all the colorful fruits and vegetables. So those are also going to help you reach your micronutrient needs. In addition to that, they provide antioxidants and have anti-inflammatory effects, also to help you with that recovery process. Now, finally, moving up to the sexy stuff at the top of the pyramid, this is where most people want to jump to right out of the gate, understandably so. Nutrient timing and strategic supplementation, those are the things that help bring you to the next level. So as long as the first two tiers of this pyramid are met, when you start properly timing your nutrition, so for example, let's say you're about to kick off on an endurance run. Well, all right, you've got 1 hour before the run. You want to consume roughly 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. You want a simple form of carbohydrate to make sure that it actually gets digested and that sugar gets into your bloodstream readily. You use that, and then boom, performance results, opposed to somebody that fasts and then they're going to rely solely on their glycogen stores, which will eventually run out. So just little things like that, or maybe introducing an intra-workout carbohydrate and then post-workout nutrition. All of these pieces in the nutrient timing play a big role, not just for performance in the moment, but also for your recovery, which again is crucial for your next training cycle, whether that's later that day or the next day. So nutrient timing, very important, but only in the context of making sure you check all the boxes in the lower 2 tiers of this pyramid. And then finally, strategic supplementation. So we'll briefly talk about supplements later, but the point here is supplementation is great, but it's not going to be the answer to all your prayers like most people want it to be. Supplements like greens powders will never replace food. Food is always going to be the best source of those nutrients. But let's take magnesium, for example. Maybe you've identified magnesium as being important for an athlete, which it is. And then you go and you find a list of high magnesium foods and you realize, I'm not eating a bunch of these foods. So then you can say, well, I'm probably not getting enough magnesium. Well, then that would be a good indication. Maybe magnesium as a supplement would be a good choice. And that's what I call strategic supplementation. You've done a good in-depth assessment of your diet and intake. You've identified some deficiencies, and now you're supplementing just to correct those deficiencies, opposed to just taking, a random stack of supplements with the hopes that it's going to improve your performance. Worst case scenario, you build up a toxicity of a certain vitamin or mineral, and it can be damaging to your health. And then best case scenario, you're just wasting a bunch of money on these unnecessary supplements. But we'll talk more about supplements here in a little bit. So again, just to cover the hierarchy, if you hit the bottom of this pyramid, your total energy intake is dialed in, your macronutrient distributions are dialed in, and you're adequately hydrated, that is the most important piece. So if there's a day or two here and there that you feel like you missed your micronutrient needs, you didn't hit your fiber goal, your timing was off, and you didn't hit a supplement you needed, don't worry about it. The base and that foundation is the most important part. Moving on. So just a quick recap here of what differences there are between an athletic population and the general population. Okay, so like a sedentary individual that doesn't exercise. So I already talked a little bit about this, but as an athlete, you typically have more lean mass. That's more metabolically active tissue. You also have more work output, physical work output. So your energy needs are much higher than somebody that is sedentary. You've got higher need for carbohydrate to replenish the glycogen. You also have a higher need for carbohydrate just to fuel your workout and to recover from your workout. You have higher protein needs to rebuild and repair that damaged lean mass. There's a little bit more emphasis on the form of nutrients you take in, especially during that training window, right? If you only have 30 minutes to get some nutrition in prior to practice, competition, maybe a training session, well, the form of that nutrient matters. Let's say you want to consume 70 grams of carbohydrate. Well, 70 grams of carbohydrate in a whole fruit form, like let's say a couple apples or 2 bananas, well, that's got a bunch of fiber, and it's definitely not going to digest in time for you to be able to access and utilize that carbohydrate, opposed to drinking 70 grams of like Gatorade, which would be like 2 full Gatorades. Now that will digest really quickly. The gastric emptying will be much faster than something that contains fiber, and it will enter your bloodstream so you can use it immediately as it's needed. So the form of the nutrient plays a lot bigger role for athletes than it does the sedentary population. In fact, the sedentary population should pay attention to the form, but not like an athlete. So a sedentary person shouldn't be drinking Gatorade like an athlete should, if that makes sense. In addition to that, athletes are typically more metabolically efficient. So especially athletes or individuals that have been training for a long period of time, if you've been strength training for 20 years, your body becomes so efficient at metabolizing protein that instead of maybe 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, you might only need 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Because your body's so efficient at utilizing protein for repair, you don't need as much. And that's awesome because that means you've got some room for some extra carbohydrate to further fuel your performance, which is great news. Finally, like I talked about on the last slide, strategic supplementation definitely comes into play here. The general population definitely does not need to worry about supplementation in almost all cases because most vitamins, minerals, and key nutrients can be obtained easily through the diet. But because athletes have so much higher of needs, it might become difficult to achieve all of your nutrient goals from food alone. And that's where that strategic supplementation comes into place. So I also want to take this time to just kind of talk about research studies and how if you see something on social media, it might not actually apply to you. So we'll talk a little bit about it in the myth busting section. But just for example, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I constantly see on social media that basically just completely demonizes added sugars. And for good reason, because a lot of the general population that's sedentary doesn't need that added sugar. If you're sedentary and consume a bunch of highly refined carbohydrates, your body overly relies on insulin to clear that glucose from your bloodstream, and eventually that system will wear out and break down. Insert diabetes. That's how it happens. But athletes don't have the same problem because when you're working out, your body has this amazing system in place. Each one of your cells has transport proteins on the outside to allow glucose in. Well, some of those cells are activated from insulin, but there's one key transporter, the GLU4 transporter, that is opened up only through exercise. So that is an amazing, amazing feature of performance nutrition, right? And that is why not all studies you see on social media or the news or wherever you see these studies apply. So it's very important to look at a research study and say, okay, was the sample population in this study athletic individuals or were they just general, sedentary individuals? That is a really, really important point. So there's so much fear-mongering around things like carbohydrates. It's really important to put it into context, especially if you're an athletic individual. All right, so moving right into that myth busting. Good segue with the carbohydrates. So I saw this Instagram post the other day. Gatorade is not hydrating. It is making you sick. And this is a perfect example of how they demonize a sports supplement because the general population thinks Gatorade is something you can just sit around and drink while you're freaking watching daytime TV. Not the case. Gatorade was designed scientifically for athletes. It is meant for athletic populations to be used during and before or immediately following training. But again, there's this misinterpretation of research findings, right? You might see a study that says, oh, this population cut sugar, by X amount and all these health outcomes improved. Well, of course, because the sample population was just a bunch of sedentary adults. It wasn't looking at athletes. It wasn't gauging their performance. So it's really important to keep all of that in mind. There's also just a generalized poor understanding of human nutrition, right? A lot of people promoting all of these claims, they don't understand glycolysis or the Krebs cycle or the electron transport chain. They don't fully comprehend the biochemistry involved of eating a carbohydrate containing food, what happens inside of your body, and how that results in energy. So just make sure you're getting your information from a trustworthy source. That is my main point. There's just all this fear-mongering around sugar, and it's really detrimental to athletes because carbohydrates are so important. I'll mention it again in an upcoming slide, but if you look at all the top-performing athletes, the ones that you see on the podiums, winning gold medals, performing best in sport, those athletes invariably eat a high amount of carbohydrates. If they didn't, and fat was the preferred fuel source of the body, we would see all these top-tier athletes fueling primarily on fat. That just isn't the case. So moving on, fad diets is another thing I commonly have to dispel myths about, right? People ask me, oh, should I be on the carnivore diet? Should I do the keto diet? Should I intermittent fast? And in almost all cases, the answer is no. First and foremost, diets have an expiration date, right? They've got a shelf life. People look at diets like some 30-day trend, like, or 75 hard. But really, your diet should be something that you sustain and maintain throughout the course of your entire life. You might make adjustments here on there based on your performance goals. For example, if you're an endurance runner, your carbohydrate needs are going to be much higher than if you're somebody in a powerlifting stage of their performance game, right? So that might change, but your diet should really look the same with the exception of maybe lowering the carbohydrate foods a little bit and increasing the lean, high protein foods. But things like the keto diet, right? The keto diet was designed for children with epilepsy, okay? It wasn't designed for athletes. It was designed for medical purposes. And somehow somebody caught drift of, wow, this diet can help me burn body fat. And it does, right? And in a clinical setting for things like epilepsy, cancer, diabetes, the keto diet might be a really beneficial diet to be on. The problem with it is really hard to sustain. And as an athlete, the metabolism of fat is a much slower process than the metabolism of carbohydrates. Again, this is being promoted by people that don't understand human nutrition and metabolism. So the way I like to always describe it is carbohydrate metabolism, being that it's the preferred fuel source of humans, is like an interstate highway. And fat metabolism, even though fat is an awesome fuel source and we have a lot of it on our bodies and we're constantly burning it throughout the day, it is a much slower process. It is like a bumpy dirt road. So although both will get you from A to B, carbohydrates will always be the faster route, which is why your body prefers it, especially for performance. So you may have heard of athletes being fat adapted, which means they have eaten a high fat diet and their body has become more efficient at burning fat. That does not change the laws of physiology. Fat metabolism requires more oxygen. So during high intensity workouts or really long endurance workouts where oxygen availability is limited, you will be limited to that step, right? So you can only move and perform as fast as your body can break down that fat and convert it into usable energy. Whereas carbohydrate metabolism does not matter on the individual whatsoever, will always be faster. So a fat adapted athlete will arguably perform much better if they switch to carbohydrates as their primary fuel source. Again, this is in a performance setting. The carnivore diet, I won't spend much time on. It is trash, okay? It completely eliminates basically all high fiber foods. You're missing out on key antioxidants. You're missing out on that prebiotic fiber. You're missing out on a whole bunch of key nutrients that you just can't get. In addition to that, most people don't understand, if you eat an abundance of protein, your body will convert that via gluconeogenesis into usable carbohydrate. Another reason the keto diet is bad, because if you consume too much protein on a keto diet, well, guess what? Your body's going to convert that protein into carbohydrate and kick you right out of ketosis. But the last one I want to briefly talk about is fasting, because a lot of athletes ask me about whether or not they should intermittent fast prior to training. And the answer is typically no, unless there's a really good reason, like that athlete just cannot eat. It causes way too much GI upset. We typically try to work on that. But if there's absolutely no way they can eat, then they might just have to go training fasted. But the reason we don't want to train fasted is because our main fuel source during exercise, again, is going to be carbohydrate. So that is coming from our body's glycogen stores. So let's take the example of somebody that works out right away when they get up in the morning, okay? When you sleep, your body is still tapping into some of that glycogen. So you wake up in a mild state of glycogen depletion. And if you go into your training fasted, you are almost certainly going to expend the majority, if not all, of your glycogen during that workout, making your recovery that much harder to replace all of that glycogen. Compared to the athlete that, fuels before exercise, maybe it's just a Gatorade, but at least then they've got 30 grams of usable carbohydrate, which will prevent their body from tapping as much into those glycogen stores, right? Because it's got 30 grams to at least start with. So that athlete might only diminish, let's say 50%, just for sake of argument, 50% of their stored glycogen. So now that athlete only has 50% to make up for. So their recovery process is much quicker. In addition to that, athletes that train fueled typically have more usable energy and perform harder during the workouts, meaning you are going to get an increased stimulus from the workout, and your gains will then reflect that, opposed to the fasted individual. So last but not least, supplement use. So again, I know I spoke about it already, but I want to hit it again. People overly rely on supplements. They ignore the word itself, supplement, and for some reason think replace, right? Greens powders is the best example. Supplements are, as the name implies, they are intended to only supplement your diet, not replace anything. When used properly, like I talked about that strategic supplementation, they absolutely have a place in an athlete's diet. But outside of that, you can't just blanket all of your deficiencies with supplements and hope it's going to work out. I don't think people realize that the nutrition you get from foods, the vitamins and minerals in whole foods, are actually absorbed better than isolated synthetic supplements or nutrients in supplements, right? We can take vitamin C as an example. You are going to absorb and utilize more of the vitamin C from an orange than you would from a vitamin C tablet. And the reason for that is all of the other nutrients that come packaged with the whole food, like an orange, all those other vitamins and minerals, plus the water and fiber, they work synergistically together because it's coming in a perfectly packaged, vessel, essentially, the whole food. And your body's designed, it has evolved to extract all of the nutrition from this whole food. So whole food is always going to be the best source of your nutrition. The other thing with supplements is that the market for supplements is so unregulated. New supplements come out every day. The FDA can't possibly inspect and approve every supplement, right? And by the time a supplement becomes problematic, like in the Marine Corps, there was a pre-workout. I'm pretty sure it was Jack 3D. Well, guess what? It had banned substances in it, and Marines were popping on piss tests left and right because of this pre-workout. Well, by the time they have identified the problem, the company just pulled it off the shelves and reformulated it. So that is why it is crucial, if you are going to supplement, to make sure that you're getting a supplement from a trustworthy company that does third-party testing, especially if you're in athletics. Getting something that has the NSF seal, which is certified for sport. You want to see this third-party testing on all of your supplements. You want to make sure that the company is transparent. You're not seeing things on the labels like proprietary blend. That company should list every nutrient in its exact amount, and it should back it with third-party testing to make sure that you are actually getting what you're paying for. But supplements is a big one. Safety, always pay attention to safety. That's again why we're looking for trustworthy companies, and you want to make sure that it's actually doing what it's intended to do. Moving on. I'll see if this video plays. If not, I'm going to walk you right through it. All right, it looks like it will.
Beefs, fake protein.
Guys, can we take a quick protein break? Protein City. I got my beans, my bars, my goos, my clumps, my fizz. I don't know what that one is, but you want in?
I'm good, man.
I think Goop was a bad choice.
Ultra, what's your beef?
All right. So obviously it's a funny video, but the point is, again, somebody that knows something about nutrition will look at this and, get a good laugh and understand that, okay, this is obviously totally incorrect. But somebody that doesn't realize what they just saw might go, I've got a cross-country skiing event coming up. Maybe they want to try their first Berkey. And, everyone's telling them, make sure you get those carbohydrates in. Try those goos, those carbohydrate powders, some candy to get the actual fuel your body needs. And they go, no, I'm going to use beef jerky, which is absolutely not something you want to utilize for a fuel source prior to exercise, and especially not during exercise. So it's things like this that I constantly get a good laugh at, but it just kind of goes to show and exemplify how poor an understanding of nutrition the general population has. So again, do not fear carbohydrates for performance. They are super important. Moving on. If my computer will cooperate. All right. So this is a very important point. You need to fuel for your specific performance goals. So in my example here, I've got somebody that's, let's say, powerlifting, right? They might be training for a strongman event. They might be training for a powerlifting meet. And that is going to look a lot different nutritionally than somebody on the right who is training for, let's say, an ultra marathon, right? So just to give you a very overgeneralized example, the person who's in strength and power is going to have a much higher protein need than the individual training for ultra endurance. The ultra endurance athlete is going to have a much higher carbohydrate need than the individual training for strength and power. So just again, for a generalized example, maybe the strength and power athlete has their carbohydrate distribution set at 50% of their total calories, whereas the ultra endurance athlete is going to be at the top tier of the acceptable range, which is about 65% of their total calories is going to come from carbohydrates, right? And they need to lower their protein just to accommodate that high level of carbohydrate. So we all have, a baseline caloric need that we need to meet on a daily basis. So we need to fit in our protein goals, our carbohydrate goals, and leave enough room for adequate fat. So knowing what you're fueling for is super crucial when you're planning your individualized nutrition, right? Again, function is the most important part of this. You want to eat and train for a function, right? So whatever sport you're in, whether it's soccer, football, lacrosse, powerlifting, endurance running, sprinting, whatever it is, you got to keep that in mind, and you have to fuel for that specific function. I think there's also this fascination and kind of misguided expectation of body image, right? If we think of athletes in each of those sports, right? Let's take a strongman competitor. Those guys are huge. Their bodies are huge. They look a lot different than somebody running in ultra endurance events competitively. So I always try to tell my clients, let your body do what it's going to do and look the way it's going to look. I want to focus on those assessment criteria. Are you performing like you want to perform, and are you meeting all of your nutrition goals? Everyone wants to look their best and feel their best, but just understand your body's going to look a certain way based on the sport you're performing in, the activities you're performing in. It is a direct reflection of what it's been training for. So go into that in mind, right? Like this guy on the left doing this awesome deadlift, he's probably not going to be able to go run 100 miles, right? Just like this guy on the right, who's probably running 100 miles, won't be able to deadlift like the guy on the left. So just keep that in mind. And your fueling, again, is going to be directly related to that performance. So I think too many people get caught up in the weeds. A quick note on weight loss, because of course the pinnacle, everyone's ideal would be, well, I want to lose body fat and gain muscle. So although that's possible, it is really hard to achieve. I'm not saying it's impossible, right? But it is quite hard to achieve. Just understand that if you are pursuing weight loss, it is best to do that in an off cycle. So definitely not during peak training, and definitely not right before competition. Once that's done and you've got some downtime where your training days are a lot lighter, if you want to pursue weight loss, that is a good time to get yourself in a strategic calorie deficit. But to do it properly, you have to have a really good understanding of what your individual needs are, and then you can slowly enter into a calorie deficit. But we're talking like 300 calories at a time deficit, right? So if your maintenance needs are 2,000 for sake of argument, your deficit's going to be, 1,700 now. And you're going to try that out for 2 weeks to 4 weeks and see what your weight does. But the deficits aren't huge. Athletes putting themselves into a nutrient or a caloric deficit run the risk of under-consuming key nutrients, right? Not only being underfueled, right? Like not consuming enough carbohydrate to replace that glycogen, not consuming enough protein to repair the muscle, but they might also be becoming deficient in those micronutrients. Things like calcium. You need that for muscle contraction. You need that for your bone density. Okay, and if you are in a big caloric deficit, you run the risk of falling short in those key nutrients, which will lead to potential injury and underperformance, which of course we want to avoid. So anytime an athlete approaches me and they want to lose weight, we do it slow, we do it controlled, and we do it very carefully to make sure that they still get adequate nutrition and don't become deficient in any one nutrient. So I hope that makes sense. So this is a really easy starting point. So I borrowed this from Colorado University in Colorado Springs. So these are the athletes plates. You can feel free to visit the website. They've got them, free to the public, but it's just a great visual representation of what plates look like during different intensities of training. So you can see on an easy training day, the most notable difference is half the plate is full of high fiber, low calorie, nutrient dense fruits and vegetables. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, half the plate is now those less colorful, starchy carbohydrates, things like pastas, rice, potatoes, things of that nature that are really dense in carbohydrates, because after a really hard training day, you need to replenish that glycogen. You need to refuel. You want your calories to match your output. So using this, it gives you a really good idea just, of general visualization, what your plate should look like to match your intensity of training on any given day. Now, of course, this is just a generalized picture, right? Your plates might look differently, but I hope that it will give you a good starting point to start visualizing what your meals and snacks look like during training. So again, that's from the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. Feel free to join it. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about micronutrient assessments, if you want to do a deep dive on your own micronutrient assessment, one great resource is from Oregon State University, and that's the Linus Pauling Institute. So you can go to the Linus Pauling Institute, which is offered through Oregon State University, and they have a micronutrient information center. There you can find in-depth articles on each micronutrient, all the vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients like choline, coenzyme Q10, omega-3 fatty acids. And there you can also see not only what the recommended dietary allowance is or the adequate intake number, but you'll see the upper intake limits. You'll see lists of food that are high in that given nutrient, so you can start assessing your own micronutrient intake and seeing if you might be a candidate for some strategic supplementation. Finally, these as a coach in nutrition are the friction points that I most commonly see. And I've placed them on a spectrum from things that are easiest to change all the way to the things that are most difficult to change. So the first one's going to be knowledge deficit. Everyone is constantly improving their knowledge. Even myself, who is a professional in the space, I constantly am reading new scientific articles, staying abreast of what's the latest and greatest, trying to grow my knowledge base, even going back to the basics and just refreshing myself on simple things like glycolysis or the tricarboxylic acid cycle, things like that. From there, moving down the spectrum, we run into the inability to properly apply the knowledge. So for example, you might have the knowledge that 1 hour prior to a workout, you should consume 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. But if you don't know what foods are high in carbohydrate, of course you're going to find it difficult to apply that knowledge. Or maybe you'll go, well, that means I need like 2.5 bananas. And you eat 2.5 bananas 1 hour before a workout. And then you go work out and you had a stomach ache. And you're like, well, what the heck? Well, it's probably because you didn't realize, because your knowledge was lacking, that you shouldn't also consume a high amount of fiber right before a workout. So easily correctable, but it's definitely harder to teach and correct compared to a knowledge deficit. The next one is even harder to correct, and that is just piss poor planning. This really comes down to the individual, because you're either good at planning or you're not good at planning, right? When it comes to your nutrition, especially in the performance setting, to perform your best, it takes time, it takes dedication, and it takes proper planning. You need to forecast your upcoming week. You need to look at when you're going to train. You need to plan what you're going to eat before, potentially during, and after that workout, and then what you're going to eat the rest of the day. And if you travel for work, you're going to have a plan when you're traveling. So, if you're going to a hotel, maybe call ahead. Does my hotel have a mini fridge? Are there grocery stores nearby? Is there a microwave? Is there a continental breakfast? Do I need snacks for the plane? All of these things go into planning, and it takes time. Nobody's perfect, but the better you can plan, the better your outcomes are going to be. And then finally, the thing that is impossible to coach somebody on really is discipline. You either have it or you don't, and to change it, it comes from within. That's why I put Jocko up there as a little motivation factor, because he is the king of discipline. But all jokes aside, that part is crucial. you need to have the discipline to make it happen, right? At the end of a long workday after training, the last thing you probably want to do is lay out all of your food in the fridge and prep it for the next day. That might mean cooking breakfast that you're going to heat up in the morning and eat. It might mean packing 6 different Tupperwares of all the food you're going to eat. But you need to have the discipline to do that if you expect to perform your best. Or you just have a bunch of money and you pay somebody to do it for you. But in either case, you need to have the discipline to get to that point. So again, those are the common friction points, and hopefully that kind of gives you a path forward on some stuff to maybe identify within yourself if you're struggling with your personal nutrition. So this question slide was really developed for the live Q&A. I'm going to take this opportunity just to kind of, again, give you a little bit about what I do with coaching. So if you haven't noticed by now, nutrition in general, and specifically performance nutrition, is highly individualized, right? I can give all the generalized recommendations in the world, but that does not mean it's going to specifically apply to a certain person. Even though the general recommendation might say, 2 hours prior to exercise, we want you to consume 2 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. Well, maybe that athlete doesn't work well with that. Maybe they need a little bit more. Maybe they crush it with a little bit less. Okay. Maybe one athlete consumes X amount of calories and athlete B has the exact same body composition, exact same weight, but their calorie needs are slightly lower and they can still maintain the same weight. All of these small, unique physiological differences between all of us as individuals plays a big role in nutrition. And that's why as a coach, it's really fun for me to kind of be a detective, identify all these small things and help you tweak your nutrition to get to the place you want to be. So that's what I do as a coach. I hope you got something from this presentation. Obviously, it was tough. I had to scratch the surface on a whole bunch of topics that I definitely could have dived deeper into. But thanks for hanging out with me and bearing through this presentation. See you next time.